Tuesday, March 13th, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So I've been, thinking a lot about what's happening geopolitically. In my previous video, I talked about it. And then I saw an article later on this afternoon, after my first video, on Zero Hedge, and it says, Hungary's central bank to repatriate its gold from London. Well, and that means from the Bank of England, of course. The Bank of England, most of the gold there is owned by other central banks. The UK itself, or the Bank of England, only have around 300 tons. And even though Hungary doesn't have too many, their reserves are not that big, and they don't have that much gold at the Bank of England, this is quite significant. And after I look at this story, I want to look at the Russian gold reserves, and something that I've noticed that's quite interesting as well. And it could be the reason also behind all the animosity towards the Russians from the Anglosphere, whatever you want to call it, Anglo-American New World Order cabal, that depends on the fiat paper dollar, and that depends on the machinations of the LBMA and the COMEX. Are they, is their game almost up? Is physical gold, being taken away from the LBMA? We'll have to see. But first, let's have a look at this Hungarian central bank story. It says here, and it's from a story at goldbroker.com, and I read from Zero Hedge. It says the leadership of the Hungarian National Bank, MNB, has decided to bring back home Hungary's gold reserves. Up to now, 100,000 ounces or 3 tons of the precious metals were stored in London, which is in total worth some 33 billion forint or $130 million at current gold prices. Yeah, it might not sound a lot, 3 tons, but the way they hypothecate in London, they could actually use these 3 tons to sell 300 tons or 600. They could hypothecate, rehypothecate to their heart's desire at the LBMA. And that's why the hypothecation is done in London, because in New York, the US regulations are more strict, and you can't hypothecate in London, you can hypothecate or leverage to an infinite amount. And interesting that Zero Hedge says the decision seems to be in line with international trends, as storage of gold reserves out of the country is now considered risky by more and more central banks. Austrian, German, and Dutch central banks are among those who have recently decided to repatriate their gold reserves. According to the Hungarian National Bank, this may also further strengthen market confidence towards Hungary. And I also remember that in 2011, Venezuela and Chavez, they repatriated their physical gold, all of it from the Bank of England. And that was just before, gold shot up to 1900. So I think I'm not saying that this 3 ton of gold from the Hungarian National Bank will have any impact, and I don't think it will, but it's a trend. Unfortunately, Chavez, wrecked his country, and I think the Venezuelans ended up losing that gold. They leased it to Goldman Sachs. They they took it out of the frying pan and threw it into the fire, so to speak. Taking it out of the Bank of England and lending it to Goldman Sachs. I mean, it's crazy. I guess they didn't have good advisors. And the other thing as well, I've talked about the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, how with the Bank of England just before World War II and during World War II, Bank of England helped the BIS and the Reichsbank, the Nazi Reichsbank, actually transfer gold and loot gold from the countries that Germany invaded. So the Bank of England did that. It helped the Reichsbank through the BIS. So should foreign governments really, or foreign central banks, really trust the Bank of England? I think there's too much trust in the Bank of England. And I guess, you know, the advantage for the Bank of England is that possession is 9/10 of the law, and England is an island. So what about Russia? You know, why all the animosity against Russia, against Putin, from the West, especially the UK and the deep state in the US? Well, I'll show you a chart of why I think there is animosity towards the Russians. It's the official gold reserves of the Russian Federation. And you look at, you know, prior to, let's say, the end of 2007, it was flatlining quite a bit on the 500 tons. And then it just started picking up. Now the Russians have almost 2,000 tons of gold. And I'm pretty positive that I don't think they have 1 ounce of that gold at the Bank of England. I might be wrong, but I wouldn't think that the Russians are, you know, that silly to keep their physical gold at the Bank of England. And it's interesting, though, because I've been following the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, or GATA. It's an organization run by Bill Murphy trying to expose the manipulation of the gold price. And I know the gold price has gone up, you know, quite a bit since he started, you know, his work in, I think, 1999. But and some people say, you know, if it was manipulated, how come it's, you know, at these levels? But I would argue that it should be even higher, and that if they hadn't manipulated the gold market or the gold price, the system would have collapsed or imploded already. This, you know, leveraged, massive debt system that we have wouldn't be around. I remember, you know, I started following Bill Murphy and GATA probably around 2002 or 3, and they had a conference called Gold Rush 21, and that happened, I think it was, when was it, 2005, and it's interesting because I remember at the time, so here we go. You know, Bill Murphy, well, it was in August of 2005 in Dawson City, Yukon in Canada, the Yukon Territory. And I remember that he talked about a Russian economic advisor to Putin attended the GATA conference. And I read here from one of the stories I found on a gold blog or gold website. It says one of Russian President Vladimir Putin's economic advisors, Andrei Bykov, contacts GATA and attends Gold Rush 21 in Dawson City, passing up the well-established mainstream gold conference in Perth, Australia. Andrei told us at the end of the GATA conference it was the finest conference he ever attended. So that was towards the end of 2005. And as you saw earlier from this chart, it was only, you know, about a year and a half later, you can see that Russia started increasing, you know, its gold holdings quite a bit. And why is that important? Well, because the fiat money dollar system and the wherewithal for the deep state and the shadow government to finance its operations worldwide, you know, militarily, economically, or whatever way they like to do it, could be greatly, you know, impacted if the gold price goes up a lot, because it shows that, you know, it's the anti-dollar. So if we have countries like Russia, China, you know, buying a lot of physical gold and actually taking delivery and not keeping it at the Bank of England, where, you know, the BIS, the Fed, and all the other major Western central banks can keep the price under control to make sure that the dollar remains, you know, strong, and that the US and NATO can, you know, dictate things. You know, this is a problem, and I think it's not a surprise, you know, that we're seeing a lot of animosity towards Russia and also towards China. And, you know, if this gold reserve chart of Russia had stayed flat below 500 tons, I don't think there would be, you know, this kind of animosity towards Russia and this provocation, really, you know, towards the Russian bear. So that's what I wanted to talk about, the gold reserves and why they're important, the physical gold. You know, it's ammunition for the manipulators, and if they're losing control of physical gold, they won't be able to control the price as much and be able to keep their fiat money game going as long. And that's, you know, a threat to them. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on steemit.com and on Twitter. I'll talk to you later. Bye.